Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. In the quiet town of Riverton, a place where neighbors greeted each other on the street and children played in the park, the community felt invulnerable to the dangers lurking beyond its borders. Nestled between rolling hills and a sparkling river, this seemingly idyllic locale bore no hint of the darkness that would soon unfold. It was the fall of 2015 when the first whispers of fear began to circulate through the tight-knit neighborhood. Margaret Simmons, a retired schoolteacher, was known for her warm smile and kind spirit. Every Sunday, she would invite her neighbors over for homemade cookies and steaming cups of tea, fostering a sense of camaraderie that defined Riverton. But on an unassuming Wednesday morning, the quaint peace was shattered when Margaret failed to attend her weekly book club meeting. Her friends, sensing something was amiss, made their way to her modest, white picket-fenced home. As they entered her living room, a chill swept through the air. Sunlight slanted through the half-closed curtains, casting creeping shadows against the wall. The familiar aroma of Margaret's vanilla candles was absent, replaced by a sense of foreboding that gnawed at their hearts. Panic swelled when they found her beloved Persian cat, Mr. Whiskers, roaming aimlessly around the darkened house, his meows echoing eerily in the silence. They searched every room, calling Margaret's name, yet only the soft creaking of the floorboards answered back. It was as though she had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace, no explanation, a haunting mystery that would send tremors through Riverton and stir a sea of questions in their minds. Where could she be? And more chillingly, who else was watching? The investigation would soon reveal that Riverton was harboring secrets darker than anyone could have imagined. The victim, Margaret Simmons, was not just a pillar of the community. She was a beacon of stability in a rapidly changing world. Born and raised in Riverton, she had woven her life tightly into its fabric. With a degree in education, she dedicated decades to shaping the minds of generations at the local elementary school, often spending her evenings tutoring children in her living room, surrounded by books and laughter. By all accounts, she was beloved, a grandmother figure to many. On the surface, Margaret lived an unremarkable life, marked by routine. Early morning walks by the river, afternoons spent gardening in her backyard, and evenings with her cherished novels. But beneath the surface, her golden days were shadowed by the passing of her husband, Frank, 5 years prior. Frank's death had left a void, one that had dimmed the sparkle in her eyes, but had not extinguished her spirit. In his memory, she had established a scholarship fund in his name, further solidifying her reputation as a compassionate soul. The morning of her disappearance, Margaret had planned to attend a meeting about expanding the scholarship initiative. Friends recalled her animated presence at the last gathering, her eyes lit with passion, her voice brimming with enthusiasm as she spoke about helping the youth of Riverton. However, as they pieced together the preceding days, they began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor, a slight unease, a repetitiveness in her conversations, perhaps a hint of distraction that wasn't usual. As the investigation unfolded, authorities spoke with those close to her, delving into her life, searching for any signs or disturbances that might illuminate her whereabouts. Were there shadows lurking in the corners of her life troubles she kept hidden from the prying eyes of her friends? The gentle town of Riverton had always appeared serene, yet Margaret's world held threads of complexity that were woven tightly together, offering no immediate answers. Each conversation revealed more about the layers of a woman who had touched so many lives, but remained achingly solitary, in her final days. As they focused on the beloved teacher's life, the question shifted. Was Margaret merely a victim of circumstance? Or was there something more sinister at play? With each interview, the layers deepened, and the heart of the mystery began to unfold, hinting at a darkness lurking in the calm. The crime scene. As the late morning sun climbed higher in the sky, police tape flapped in the warm autumn breeze. The stark yellow contrasting sharply with the white of Margaret's home. Officers arrived soon after the worried friends alerted them to Margaret's absence, their badge numbers glinting under the golden rays as they marked her modest abode as a crime scene. With each sealed window and locked door, the door to Riverton's innocence creaked open, the air thickening with tension. Detective Sarah Malone, a seasoned investigator with an intuition honed over years of service, took a deep breath before stepping inside. Every detail would matter, each speck of dust, every misplaced item. The dimly lit interior felt foreign, as though it was no longer the welcoming refuge Margaret had cultivated. The scent of her cherished vanilla candles was mere memory, overtaken by the sterile smell of harsh clinical reality. She entered the living room, where the cat still roamed, now perched on Margaret's favorite armchair. The detective's gaze was immediately drawn to a small leather-bound journal, resting casually atop the coffee table. Curiosity pricked at her. Instincts. Was this a key, or merely an unrelated token? Flipping it open, Sarah noted the pages filled with a neat but hurried script chronicling various community events. But one entry stood out. A series of anonymous notes that had recently begun to invade Margaret's mail. The tone was unsettling, oscillating between threats masked as warnings. Investigators combed through the rest of the house, seeking signs of struggle or intent. Yet it seemed eerily untouched. Apart from Margaret's few private possessions, she had been meticulous, her house a shrine to order. The kitchen was spotless, the fragrant aroma of bygone meals fading into oblivion, while her meticulously arranged spice rack stood in stark contrast to the chaos of lingering uncertainty. In the basement, however, a striking discovery awaited. A loose floorboard tipped open revealed a dusty box, its contents cloaked in shadows. Detective Malone's heartbeat quickened as she opened it slowly, exposing a collection of photographs, some seemingly innocuous, others unsettlingly intrusive, taken from various angles around town. The world outside now felt fraught with danger. It appeared someone had been watching Margaret for some time. As police secured the scene, the gravity of their task set in. This was no simple missing persons case. The tendrils of fear and consequence curled around Riverton, wrapping tighter as each thread unraveled in the gloom of the investigation. The specter of the crime loomed larger, shrouded in ambiguity. And for Detective Malone, the descent into the unknown had only just begun. The early investigation. Detective Sarah Malone emerged from the haunting stillness of Margaret's home, the weight of the evidence pressing heavy on her shoulders. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that contorted as she walked back to the cluster of officers gathered outside. Her focus intensified. The town's tranquility had been breached, and it was her mission to restore the peace that so many relied on. The early stages of the investigation involved scanning the neighborhood, a slow, methodical process that required a deft hand at extracting information. Interviews overflowed with the familiar cadence of small-town gossip, but beneath the chatter lay threads of knowledge and insight that could direct their inquiries. Detective Malone carefully documented testimonies, eyes trained for any hint of hesitation or unease. Among those questioned was Michael Drew, the local handyman known for his willingness to help anyone in need. He had often lent his skills to Margaret, repairing gutters and painting fences. Initially cordial, his demeanor shifted when Sarah broached the topic of last seeing her. He shuffled his feet and avoided eye contact, mumbling how she seemed a bit off in recent weeks. His vague responses raised alarms. Had he known more than he was letting on? Or was he simply overwhelmed by the tragedy of Margaret's absence? As the night enveloped Riverton, a prevailing sense of urgency marked the hours. The police dispatched teams to canvass the area with missing person flyers plastered across telephone poles, their serene image juxtaposed against the backdrop of impending dread. Meanwhile, detectives scoured Margaret's social media pages and personal correspondence, seeking to unearth anything that might reveal hidden connections, silence fears, or brewing conflict. A breakthrough came in the form of an urgent Teepa neighbor, Vivian, recalled hearing a heated argument late one evening, just days before Margaret's disappearance. Confirmation coursed through them like adrenaline, reviving their hope amidst shadows. Sarah arranged to meet Vivian, her palms clammy with anticipation. Answers lay just beyond the threshold of Riverton's well-hidden truths. But shadows of doubt crept deeper into her mind. Who could possibly harbor such animosity toward Margaret, and what lengths would they go to recover their secret? As the night wore on, the clock counted down the hours, and with each passing moment, the stakes grew higher, rippling through the community like a pebble cast into a pond. The confession of an argument stirred the investigation forward. A sense of tension electrified their efforts, the small-town charm now laden with the heavy air of something sinister. The detective's determination solidified Margaret Simmons would not become just another faded memory. The truth would be fought for, no matter how dark the path ahead. The dead ends. As the day stretched into a week since Margaret Simmons had vanished, the urgency of the investigation felt more like a tightening noose around the detectives' collective neck. Their lead about the argument had seemed like a beacon of hope. However, as they delved deeper into the investigation, the promising leads gradually morphed into frustrating dead ends. Detective Sarah Malone met with Vivian, the neighbor who had mentioned the argument. As the two sat in the small, well-worn kitchen, steam rising from cups of coffee, Sarah took note of the tension etched across Vivian's face. "I swear, it was coming from Margaret's house," she insisted, her voice wavering slightly. Yet, when pressed for more details, Vivian struggled to recall specifics: a name, a date, anything to corroborate her fragile claim. The uncertain recollection sent Sarah's head spiraling as the case felt more vulnerable by the minute. Next, they turned their attention to Michael Drew, the handyman. An interview with local police yielded an unsettling discovery. The handyman had initially downplayed his interactions with Margaret, but a search of his records found multiple calls to the police from Margaret's house over the past 6 months due to a series of disturbance-loud noises, fearful yelling that never developed into proper emergencies. Michael's cooperation and helpful demeanor had masked a troubling narrative. As they sought to connect the dots, frustrations mounted. The physical evidence from Margaret's home, including the journal and photos, offered little clarity. The notes written in a jagged hand seemed generic, lacking specific threats or demands. The photograph's beautiful snapshots of Riverton merged with sinister angles of Margaret's home left investigators haunted by the thought of a voyeur hidden in plain sight. "What have they heard? Oh, none of I have known. All right, wow. You see, all right. A second visit to the neighborhood yielded empty leads, whispers that ran in circles, and nothing that tied Margaret's disappearance to a clear suspect. The once charming streets of Riverton felt painted with fear, crumbling under the weight of suspicion. Investigators combed through security footage from streets surrounding her home, desperate for a glimpse of something, but the grainy recordings only amplified their frustrations. They were hunting shadows in a town where everyone was smudged into anonymity. The mounting pressures began to seep into Sarah's mind. Sleepless nights were punctuated by visions of dead ends. It weighed heavily on her heart that this tightly knit community, so vibrant in their friendships and familial connections, was now rattled by the specter of fear that rippled through schools, shops, sidewalks. Every whisper held the potential for danger, and every dead end flashed warnings that shadows lay deeper still. With each turn, Sarah wondered how closely hidden Riverton's darkest secrets took shelter beneath the surface, waiting patiently for the moment to emerge. A break in the case. As the days turned into a tormenting cycle of dread, the stagnant air of uncertainty began to fracture with the thrum of renewed urgency. On the 10th day since Margaret Simmons' disappearance, Detective Sarah Malone sat in the precinct, wires of connection stretching wildly on her whiteboard, a web of names, places, and events. All she needed was a single thread to pull it all together. That afternoon, a jarring phone call sliced through the hum of the precinct. A resident of an area near the outskirts of Riverton had reported finding a suspicious bag abandoned beside an old shed while out walking her dog. The woman's sharp intuition tugged at the remnants of the town's moral fabric. Sarah's heart raced as she gathered her team and rushed to the location, each minute pulsing with the hopes that this moment could pivot the course of their investigation. Arriving at the shed, the surrounding scene held a loveliness born from neglect. Wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, but it felt more like a graveyard than a garden. The bag was weathered, its fabric torn under the weight of the earth and time, emanating a faint odor of must and decay. With careful precision, Sarah knelt beside it and gingerly unzipped the bag. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside, she uncovered a trove of items. Clothing that belonged to Margaret, a patterned scarf, a pair of slippers, and a small journal that bore her initials. Fingers trembling, she opened the journal to reveal pages filled with frantic scrawls that danced between coherent thoughts and illegible panic. Dated entries painted a vivid picture of Margaret's last days. Pervasive feeling of being watched. Missed appointments, she said, but didn't attend. And notes on friends she feared would betray. Among the pages lurked a name not previously recorded in their investigation. Ethan. It read, followed a scattered line of confessions. I'm scared. He won't let me go. The name sent a shiver racing down Malone's spine. Who was Ethan? The jittery search for answers now took on an urgency that rippled through her team. They immediately began tracking down any connections to an Ethan Reynolds, a name that, for now, stuck out like a sore thumb against the backdrop of Riverton's innocent facade. Within the next few hours, they learned that Ethan had been a troubled young man who occasionally frequented the local community center. Rumors buzzed about him. Stories of volatile behavior intermixed with accolades for his artistic talent that left him much beloved by some and avoided by others. Haunted by the words scrawled in Margaret's journal, the detectives hurried back to the precinct, feeling at once renewed and filled with dread. This break in the case injected fresh energy into their weary spirits. They were finally closing in on a person of interest. As the clock ticked forward, they delved deep into Ethan's past, racing against time to uncover the truth before it could slip away, hidden in the shadows of Riverton's heart. The suspect, Ethan Reynolds, was a young man whose life had been characterized by a struggle against the demons of his past. Raised in a tumultuous household in Riverton, the echoes of chaos reverberated through his childhood. Friends described him as a gifted artist, known for painting striking local landscapes and portraits that often reflected the turmoil within, a duality of beauty and despair. Yet his artistic gifts did little to shield him from the insecurities that plagued his adult life. Detective Sarah Malone approached the small and unkempt apartment on Reed Street, a hunch spiraling in her gut. She felt both anxious and resolute. If Ethan was tied to Margaret's disappearance, the threads of their lives would soon intertwine in ways unseen. The structure loomed before her, paint peeling from the facade, casting shadows reminiscent of the troubled soul it housed. Ethan opened the door with a hesitant demeanor, suspicion writ across his face. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice laced with the rough edges of anxiety. The detective introduced herself and explained the situation, each word laden with caution. As they conversed, she took stock of his tattered clothes and the dark circles beneath his eyes. Or are you guilt or innocence? It remained to be seen. Through careful questioning, Sarah observed Ethan's responses were uneasily erratic. His mood shifted like the wind, from defensive to almost vulnerable in the span of a heartbeat. Yet his eyes darted around, betraying a heightened awareness, as if he were a rabbit caught in headlights. He denied knowing Margaret and claimed they had only exchanged pleasantries at the community center. But when pressed for specifics, hesitation suffocated his words. Then came the matter of Margaret's journal. Pacing the room, she dared to drop the name etched within its pages. "She mentioned you. Ethan, this is serious. You need to help us." His face paled, lips trembling as he grasped the edge of the kitchen counter, knuckles whitening beneath the strain of his grip. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Ethan murmured, the words spilling forth like a broken dam. "I never wanted any of this." Confession hung in the air, wrapped in an almost palpable urgency. Sarah seized the moment, a rush of adrenaline surging through her. "What do you mean, Ethan? Did you see her? Did you see her? Did you speak to her?" That's when he spoke of the nights he would run into Margaret at the community center, often catching glimpses of her in conversation with other residents. He painted a picture of her growing anxiety, claiming she'd become increasingly volatile, afraid of someone she couldn't name, a shadow that lurked too close for comfort. "I told her no one's safe in Riverton. Someone is watching." I tried to warn her, I really did. Yet the more Ethan revealed, the deeper the dissonance became. Why, then, had he kept his distance? If he cared, why didn't he step in sooner? Sensing an opportunity to unveil whatever truth lingered in the shadows, Sarah carefully navigated the conversation, pushing deeper. Ethan eventually fell into silence, his features contorting into a mix of guilt and realization. She pressed him again about his connection, each word hung with the weight of untruths and half-revealed secrets. The stakes rose as she considered he was either an emerging witness to something dire or, perhaps worse, a player in a game of shadows too complex for a town like Riverton. As the conversation drew to a close, one truth loomed clear somewhere. In the labyrinth of desperation lay answers, and the connection to Margaret moved dangerously close, to a point of no return. The detective in her knew they had stepped onto fragile ground. If Ethan held any answers, they fast became intertwined with the hopes of not only uncovering Margaret's fate, but also of unearthing the darkest secrets that Riverton had been keeping hidden for far too long. The trial. The courtroom buzzed with a tense energy as the trial of Ethan Reynolds commenced. A palpable tension, hovering like smoke, over the spectators gathered to witness the proceedings that would unfold. Riverton had transformed into a tranquil haven, now a community caught in the grips of fear and uncertainty, shaped by the unshakable specter of Margaret Simmons' disappearance. Detective Sarah Malone sat among the audience, her heart heavy as she bore witness to the gravity of the case that had consumed her life. The air was thick with anticipation, each moment stretching like rubber as the jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. Press corps scribbled notes amid flashes from cameras, capturing the tension that draped itself over the room. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, looking small and fragile amid the pressures bearing down on him. Shadows clung to his features, accentuating the weariness etched across his face. The prosecutor, a tall figure with piercing eyes, opened the case methodically, painting a picture of Ethan as a disturbed individual driven to desperation by a combination of emotional turmoil and unrequited affection toward Mark. Each word felt like an arrow, firing at the heart of the matter. Witness after witness was called to testify, their statements invoking a mix of sorrow and anger. Friends spoke of Margaret's vibrant spirit, recounting tales of laughter that now felt like distant echoes in the wake of her absence. They shared the distressing admissions of her growing paranoia, revealing snippets of conversations that hinted at her fear of being watched. But as they painted Margaret as a victim, the undercurrent of unease tightened around the courtroom. When Detective Malone took the stand, the atmosphere shifted. Under cross-examination, she remained composed, detailing the evidence collected in Margaret's belongings found at the shabby shed, her haunting journal filled with anxiety-ridden entries, and Ethan's tangled relationship with the victim. The defense mounted a fierce challenge, attempting to undermine Sarah's credibility, painting her as an investigator led astray by her biases and unsubstantiated connections. As the days of testimony unfolded, Ethan's own defense took center stage. A whirlwind of accusations flooded the court. He was merely an innocent bystander, a troubled artist whose life had spiraled into chaos. They pushed the narrative that Margaret had been his muse, her eventual withdrawal triggering a cascade of overwhelmed emotions. His shaky confessions were wielded like a double-edged sword, opening doors to empathy while simultaneously leaving room for doubts about his character. As the trial dragged on, the mournful echoes of Margaret's absence permeated the walls of the courtroom. Each day, the community was forced to confront memories overshadowed by anguish. The space she had once filled now a gaping void. It became painfully evident that the heart of Riverton was not merely mourning a lost life, but teetering on the precipice of revealing a collective truth, one the jury must grapple with. Closing arguments sharpened the focus on Ethan's potential guilt, pitting emotion against the cold, hard facts. As the judge called for deliberation, silence enveloped the room, a reflection of the weighty decisions hanging in the balance. Outside, the town held its collective breath, waiting for verdicts that had the power to reshape lives. Days trudged on as the jurors pored over evidence, weighed testimonies, and reflected deeply on the threads of fear, innocence, and pain woven into the trial. Underneath the surface, beneath the crestfallen eyes of Margaret's friends, lay an undeniable truth. The trial transcended the confines of a courtroom. It was about justice for a vibrant soul lost, and the desperate need for closure in a community fractured by darkness. Ultimately, the question remained: would the jury's verdict illuminate the truth, or would it plunge Riverton into an even denser fog of grief and uncertainty? The aftermath. The verdict came down like a heavy hammer, reverberating through the walls of the courthouse. Ethan Reynolds was found guilty of manslaughter, a finding that felt both like a conclusion and an open wound for everyone involved. Gasps echoed through the room, accompanied by muffled sobs. Some rushed from the courtroom, overwhelmed by the gravity of the outcome. Others remained seated, lost in their thoughts, grappling with the complexities of justice and the reality that a life had been forever altered. Detective Sarah Malone left the courthouse, her heart laden with a mix of relief and sorrow. The verdict had drawn lines in the sand, but had left so many questions unanswered. What had truly happened to Margaret Simmons on that fateful day? As Ethan was led away, shackled and facing a future marked by confinement, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Riverton remained trapped in the aftershocks of a tragedy that had clung to its essence. The following weeks were heavy with grief and a newfound sense of vigilance. Margaret's portrait was hung in the community center, where it had once been a meeting place of laughter and stories. Friends gathered to share their memories, laughter giving way to tears as they recounted how her kindness had touched the lives of so many. Though the award fund in her name received contributions in her honor, a hollow ache lingered in the hearts of her loved ones, not just for her absence, but also the haunting specter of unresolved fear that loomed online. Amid her task of documenting notes and following up on the aftermath, Sarah carried the weight of unanswered questions. The investigation had dove into the layers of Margaret's final days, but left large gaps unexplored. What truly drove Ethan's desperation? Had there been others involved? On long, sleepless nights, she replayed moments, grappling with the truth and her convictions about justice. Had the system truly recognized the victim, or had it merely repackaged the tragedy into a digestible narrative? The atmosphere of Riverton shifted. Whispers grew more curious. Residents began scrutinizing one another, more vigilant than ever before. Darkened corners masked fear where once friendships thrived uneventfully. Rumors circulated about potential accomplices and hidden motives, casting shadows that felt too familiar. Detective Malone organized a community forum, aiming to bridge gaps, facilitate conversation, and restore some semblance of trust in the world around them. Life moved forward, albeit stuttered and hesitated. Children played in parks under watchful eyes, their laughter mingled with a tangible tension. Spring arrived, washed away by melting snow and budding flowers, yet the beauty outside felt juxtaposed against the undercurrents of unease. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over Riverton's streets, Sarah reflected on the dichotomy of life in a town that had experienced both light and darkness. The journey had demanded far more than answers. It had called for healing, acceptance, and a return to hope. With the trial behind her, Sarah began to focus on a new mission, transforming grief into action as she rallied resources for new community outreach programs aimed at mental health education. Perhaps in time, Riverton could regain its strength, slowly stitching up its deeper wounds and embracing the future, not merely as an echo of the past, but as a renewed promissory commitment to understanding that sometimes the greatest strength doesn't come from justice alone, but from the courage to confront the complexities of the human experience. Reflection. As the seasons changed and Barrows fell into the rhythm of summer, Detective Sarah Malone took time to pause by the riverbank where Margaret Simmons had often walked. Reeds swayed gently in the breeze, and the soft lapping of water against the shore brought her solace while echoing the ripples of the past months. Sitting on a weathered bench, Sarah allowed herself to reflect on the case that had consumed her. The emotional weight lingered like the whisper of the water. The town felt different now. The shadows left by tragedy hadn't vanished. Instead, they blended into the fabric of Riverton's tapestry, coloring it with resilience and ongoing strife. Margaret's absence was a fracture in the community that, while it had begun to heal, still resonated with echoes of grief. The scholarship fund continued to thrive, a testament to Margaret's spirit, transforming what was once a source of sorrow into a beacon of hope. In the quiet moments, Sarah contemplated the nature of justice. The closure the trial sought wasn't achieved simply by a verdict. It was a constant negotiation with pain and understanding. Ethan's guilt was intertwined with the broader narrative of mental health, longing, and the devastating consequences that arise when individuals feel isolated and unseen, a reflection of the fragility that exists within the human experience. Surrounded by the peace of nature, Sarah made a commitment to channel her experience into advocacy. She envisioned workshops focused on mental health awareness, bringing together community members' reminders that vulnerability could be met with compassion, that genuine connection could blossom in the wake of sorrow. In a world often driven by discord, these connections could become lifelines against the multiplying shadows. As she surveyed the glimmering waters, Sarah realized that while the past may never fade entirely, it could motivate a responsible journey forward, one built on the lessons learned from tragedy. Riverton could honor Margaret's legacy not just through memorials, but by fortifying the bonds forged in the aftermath, bridging gaps of understanding to weave a community united against fear. Here, every ripple in the water carried not only echoes of loss, but also the promise of hope, an enduring pledge to foster kindness in a world often shrouded in darkness.